So today we have Samuel Knight and Alvinson Hudson II. Both are very dear classmates of mine. Sam and I went to high school together, so since ninth grade. And Al Vincent was actually an RA in my building in Hampton Hall when I met him. So Samuel Knight has worked for the State of Maryland Department of Juvenile Services as a juvenile case manager since 2011. Previously, he has served as a youth advocate for several nonprofit organizations such as the Choice Program and Youth Opportunity Program, with the primary objective being the advancement of high-risk youth populations. He has received his bachelor's degree in the political sciences from Gettysburg College in May of 2006. During his 4 years at Gettysburg, he engaged the college during community service with the Black Student Union, radio show DJ, tutoring, and several Dame House initiatives promoting diversity. Additionally, Sam was also a student worker for what was then known as SNS, Safety and Security, better known to students now as the Department of Public Safety. Currently, Sam Knight is working with multiple community partners in Baltimore City to advocate for social justice. Some of these activities include food drives, economic and political education initiatives. Alvinson Hudson II is an educational policy and legal strategist. He received his bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College, I believe in political science, Alvinson. You can clear it up later. And his JD from Howard University School of Law. He is currently serving as legal counsel for the Virgin Islands Department of Education. He is passionate about leveraging policy, legislation, and relationships to close the achievement gap. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Vincent and Sam.
Thank you, Monique. All right. I'm happy to be here. You know what? These are trying times, but I'm excited. I really am excited about this time. And Sam and I were talking extensively. Um, and I'll share a little bit of a personal note. Well, first, let me say, well, yeah, political science. I was studying political science, and that was '05, and I do remember um, Monique being she was in the building that I was living in. I was on a different floor, and I was an RA, but that was an interesting time as well. But if I can share just a quick personal note, um, I was telling Sam as we were just thinking about what to talk about here. I'll make a quick disclaimer. I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert when it comes to really dissecting institutional racism, or if you say systemic racism or structural racism. And actually, I was having a difficult time thinking about what to say, how to say it, and if I were even ready to have a discussion. Um, I was born in Detroit, but grew up in Jersey, and as a and around middle school, we moved from a town that was the school system was primarily Black and brown to a school where I was the only Black kid in my grade from middle school up until junior year of high school, and it was difficult. I wasn't very far from my old town, still about 20 minutes. You still went like to your old church, your old barbershop, but this new town was very different, and I firsthand experienced um, death threats, people placing in like the school newspaper, racial epithets, getting strangled in a hall, attacked, um, things that up until a couple of years ago, I never really associated as being very traumatic. And while I was going in it was counseling meeting with my wife, we were talking about different trauma, and we were talking about something else. And then I was like, well, these are some experiences I experienced when I was younger. And it wasn't only until that time when the counselor was like, that's pretty traumatic. And I went into it pretty in depth. And that was the first time really naming it. So then we're at a time like this, and I really think that it's a critical point for the country. But when I see instances like with Elijah McLean and George Floyd, when I see those things, I do have flashbacks. I have flashbacks to the times when I've harassed by police and detained for a while. I remember the faces of the people that put their hands around my throat. Like, I remember these things. And so I say that to say, I wonder, I'm like, because it is an emotional experience, to even come back and have a conversation and talk about different things, whether it is racism, structural racism, disparate impact of policies. And so, as I was telling Sam, and as when I finally brought myself to look at the Elijah McClain video, I was in my son's room. I have a baby boy. He's 9 months. He has a big smile. Yeah, he looks like his mama, and so he got the looks from her. He just got dimples from me, but I was watching the video as he was in his crib, and I broke down. And for two reasons. One, the thought that there will be a time where I won't be able to protect him from different things. And I know that this is not unique. Many other people go through the same and experience the same thing. But the other thing was this: there was a thought that, and I hoped that he would be more hopeful and more optimistic about racial reconciliation and some type of redemption in this country, because I wondered, and I told Sam as we talked, I was like, I wonder how much hope I have, because there is so much hurt. And so that was kind of like a basis, and then just to offer a baseline as we have a discussion today. And if I can pose a question to everybody that's here, because running the risk that we might be potentially preaching to the choir, people that have a lot of information about racism, or to use an overly used word at this time, and you might perceive yourself to be woke. My question is, well, what are you hoping, you tuned in today, what are you hoping to get or to take away from this time that we have? And then there's a couple other questions that I think that we're going to ask, and maybe you can keep these in mind as we talk about some of these, as we talk about structural or institutional racism. As we go through, what is the gauge for success, or what does success look like? What does progress look like? And when we leave from today, what do we hope to have either equip ourselves, or we discuss that would make things different, or was this just an intellectual exercise and we just tuned in as a stopgap between our morning and our morning and our afternoon? So moving forward and talking about structural or institutional racism, I think that is a good start would be to just talk about the terms. How do we define these things? And I'm going to go ahead. Let's see if I can share my screen. I found some terms from the Aspen Institute that I thought was fascinating, and I'm going to just go ahead and take a look here and see. So let me make this larger so everybody can see it here. This is something that like I said, the Aspen Institute came up with, and they talked about 11 terms that you should know. It says a better understanding of structural racism. And as we go through, I want to just draw your attention to a few of them. We won't go over all of them, but just a few. So first, as I just read through here, it says structural racism, in which public places, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Structural racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it has been a feature of social, economic, and political systems in which all exist. So I think that's really interesting. I'm going to skip over where it talks about racial equity, because just like I said, established in the baseline, I want to touch on some of these other terms that we have here. So now let's look at how they're defining systemic racism. You know what I'm saying? In many words, systemic racism and structural racism are synonymous. You all can decide for yourselves. Maybe some people, you can put it in the chat if you have a different understanding, or maybe you agree. If there is a difference between the terms, it can be said to exist in the fact that structural racism and the structural racism analysis pays more attention to the historical, cultural, and social psychological aspects of our currently racialized society. And so it seems like what I read from that, it seems like what they're starting to say is that with the structural racism, looking more in terms of the historical context. And so starting to touch on different things in history, landmark events that would create or shape a system, whether you're talking, and whether it's policies, whether it's constructs and different things like that. While it seems like they're saying that systemic racism is just more so a commentary on what the actual structure looks like, regardless of time. Institutional racism. It says institutional racism refers to the policies and practices within and across institutions that, intentionally or not, I think that's really important, produce outcomes that chronically favor or put a racial group at a disadvantage. Poignant examples of institutional racism can be found in school disciplinary policies in which students of color are punished at a much higher rates than their white counterparts, and the criminal justice system, and within many employment sectors in which day-to-day operations as well as hiring and firing practices can significantly disadvantage workers of color. A quick anecdote, when I was in second grade, I was at a school, it was fairly mixed in Jersey, and I just noticed, and I was young, I noticed that I kept on getting I would kept on getting in trouble, and I would get held in at lunch from recess, and I thought that the teacher just had an issue with me, but then I noticed my other Black friend that was in the school, same thing around that time. He was getting called in as well. Later on, as I get older, it turned out that many Black parents had the same issue with this one teacher, and in that dynamic, it was my disciplinary record was off the charts. I was getting in trouble a lot. I used to joke that I was expelled. I was expelled from school in kindergarten. Now that's true. Now I had some fault to that too. I was turning up, but in this particular instance, there was a track record of that teacher. And it starts to, this is where you're starting to see an interface between, like we talked about, or we'll talk about cultural racism, where some teachers may have a disconnect between what they identify as appropriate behavior and what they see from children that don't look like them, that don't come from the same communities as they do. And you see that happening. And where this is, not to get ahead of myself, but when we talk about some of the impact, I didn't bring this up here, but there's a lot of research talking on ability tracking in schools. And what you'll see, and I think Georgia was one instance, many of the states, when you look at like gifted and talented, and I'm sure many of you might have been gifted and talented programs when you were in elementary school, and many studies show that a lot of the times the gifted and talented programs, teachers have a lot of discretion in addition to whatever the testing shows, so the numbers. And in that portion, and then they will also have a portion that talks about discipline. So in some instances, some programs, if a student has a disciplinary record, notwithstanding their testing and standardized tests, and what their performance throughout the semesters, they might not be qualified, or they'll be disqualified from entering into a gifted and talented program. And generally, most of the time, it would be the teachers that had to recommend them also. And so you're seeing that there's a huge disparity in these gifted and talented programs when it comes to their students of color and their white counterparts. Okay, let me just move on here. I think that was the last one I wanted to touch on there. And so as we talk about, yeah, change my screen here, but as we talk about um, structural and institutional racism, it stems from a couple of different, I mean, many different places. And we you'll see from, even as we talk about like Reconstruction at the end of the Civil War, it's incredible because you had a time where in places like Louisiana, as well as North Carolina, that you have an incredible amount of Blacks that were voted into office, into their state legislature, as well as into, and sent, a good example is in North Carolina, where they're sending some Black representatives to Congress. But then you have a period of time where, and that was till I think about around 1877, where you have a backlash, and there was a change, and really with the federal troops that were being removed from the South and no longer protecting the new rights that were afforded to um, to the former enslaved people that were there in the South. And you have an erosion of rights and progress that happen. But the reason why that's really critical is, and it starts getting into one of the slides that I wanted to bring up, was you talk about redlining, you talk about policy. I think it's always fascinating when people talk about systemic racism, and you say like, well, what does that mean? Should we just assume that everybody is racist? Should we assume that every institution is racist? But no, that's not what we're saying. What we are saying, and looking at the looking at the definition that we have, is saying that looking at the collective of policies and the constructs, there is a reinforcement of of um, of laws that will negatively impact, in this case, Black people. And I'll give a couple of quick examples. Let me just pull up my thing here, and I wanted to show a small clip. Okay. The thing that is really fascinating with redlining, as I mentioned before, and I don't think we have enough time to talk about, I don't think that we have enough time to go through a clip that I had here, is with the redlining, it really impacted not just, I mean, it was a huge economic impact. You now have individuals that were placed within certain parts, and this, what you see in front of you, is for New Orleans, but you also see an example with Chicago. In that case, where you'll have, and this is, the legend is pretty small here, but the areas that you have here that are outlined in red, this was something that they would give to, I mean, to the banks, as well as to the housing, to the Federal Housing Authority, and say that these are areas that they would deem to be essentially hazardous. They would look at the classification and say that these other areas, and the ones that you see like in green or in yellow, they'll say that these are ones that there should not be a question of you being able to either to grant people that live there mortgages, and that the property that they have there will be valuable. But what you did when you did redline, and you said that these were areas where were Black, notwithstanding whatever economic position those Black people currently had, you then said that they weren't able to obtain mortgages. They weren't able to get mortgages. And in this case, a lot of times they were subject to a lot of predatory issues. Like, issuing contracts that where you would have somebody that would sell them a contract for a house, but they wouldn't have ownership stake in it. And if they defaulted on any point in time, one of their monthly payments, that person could force them out. And even as regardless of how much they were paying, they weren't gaining equity. And this is just one of those things where you, like, by default, what you start to see is that people are relegated to certain areas because they weren't able to get to buy homes in other areas. Um, let me stop here.
Thank you, everybody. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Monique. I know Monique, like she said, since the 9th grade, and I appreciate most about her that she's a leader's leader. She came through the campus as an underclassman and totally changed the culture of the campus, probably forever, at least for over a decade. And people look at me as a leader, and I followed her. So that should tell people who know something, you know. And Al Vincent, as one of the 50 some odd minority persons on campus back in 2002, as a Black man myself, to see an older Black man doing well at a historically white college and being a positive example at the same time, that was also a boost of confidence for me. So I'm grateful for Al Vincent also. And then following up from the past two presentations, I looked at them on the Zoom replay. I said to myself, wow, you falling up after professors. So I am no professor, you know, I am no expert, but what I will attempt to do is share with you my experiences and my knowledge. Now, one thing I like to say, I'm trying to share a screen. We'll be looking at some slides. Hopefully this works. It'll be hard to do it without the screen. All right, great. It's showing, so I assume everything is good. I want to talk about institutional racism at a glance. This is too big to sum up in 20 minutes, even the parts. So it's going to be summary. We're going to be skimming through things pretty fast, just to whet your appetite and hopefully encourage each of you to look at things different and look at it, you know, into it some more. So institutional racism at a glance in media promotion, propaganda, and entertainment. Al did a pretty good job talking about institutional racism, so I'll just highlight some things. I want us to understand that it normalizes practices of racism. And a lot of times when things become a part of your normal life, we think that's reality. We think that's the way it is. And it becomes unnoticeable. Like some of us, you know, some people who hold racist views don't even know they hold racist views because in their heart, they love other groups. But because of institutional racism, what they practice unknowingly sometimes is racism. Even victims of institutional racism. Al said earlier that he found out later on down the line that he might have had PTSD, you know, but because that was normalized life, violence. I know for me, growing up in Baltimore City, since violence was a normal part of my life, when my first year in Gettysburg, I had a hard time sleeping because it was too quiet at night. It was too dark, it was too quiet. All my life, I used to hear dogs bark in the backyard and a helicopter. I go out there and the country is dead silent. I was disturbed, you know, by the silence and the peace. I also laugh at the news because the cover story was litter bugs. I wasn't used to looking at the news at night and hearing that nobody got shot today. And this is going to make sense after a while. So I want to highlight the normalized practice of racism within the society. And like Al already said, it is supported by the systematic rendering of services and et cetera, reinforcing these norms. Because norms are taught. What's normal here is not normal somewhere else, and it's based off of what we see and experience and are molded, really how we are molded to think. So examples of that is, you know, political housing, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll be talking about that in media. I also want to highlight the insidious nature of institutional racism. It's insidious because it's subtle. So when somebody say, hey, look, this example is racist, and everybody, no, it's just a movie. Understand, it's not just that one movie. It's not just that one commercial. It's not that, I forgot to get a picture of it. It wasn't just that H&M ad with a guy, or a young Black man with a monkey on his shirt saying, I'm the king of the jungle. It's not one thing. Institutional racism works short and is small increments over a span of time to normalize the behavior. So it's not that one kid wearing that one shirt. It's 100 years. And I'm sure it's at least 100 years of piled up images normalizing and reinforcing racist behavior. So point one is not as evident as individual racism because it's carried out in a way that society operates and affects the belief system of society over time. So most of the time, for example, since you're inside your body, you do not know how your facial expressions look. You really don't even know how you sound like. But when you have a mirror or when you look at a recording of yourself, you might get most people get annoyed, like, that's how my voice sound. Some men think their voices are deeper than what they are. You know, some people think they're not making smart facial expressions. They think they're keeping a straight face. And it's the same thing with institutional racism. It's oftentimes hard to see institutional racism when you're inside the institution. So hopefully another goal of mine is to help us to step outside the institution for a little bit and look at it from an objective perspective. Some of the ways it does it, point two, is that it reinforces stereotyping. It justifies discrimination and racial profiling. It's easy to deny its existence. And here's the thing, if you don't admit to a problem, you will not begin to solve it because there is no problem for me to solve. So it's easy to deny its existence, especially if you're not a part of the affected group. So if it's not damaging your self-esteem, if it's not ruining your neighborhood, if it's not affecting your children's legacy, it's hard to see that it's there. And it's easy to look at the affected group as the ones crying victim, or it's the ones who need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or care about education, because it's two different worlds at this point. All right, and then lastly, the media industry is one of the most influential tools of institutional racism. That's what I like to talk about today, and people rarely talk about the media aspect. And I believe since media is a teaching tool, this should be the number one thing we look at when it comes to racism. We could change laws and everything, but if we can move to change people's hearts, that will be better, okay? So next slide. All right. What you're looking at right now, and I'm going to try to give a brief background before I dig into it. You're looking at pictures of the Black Power movement, okay? And the reason why I'm showing these pictures, you see some Asiatics, you see some Caucasians, you see African Americans. What's happening today with the George Floyd riots are not new. There have always been Americans of all cultures that understand that we all are human beings and that we all deserve to be treated like human beings. And some facts about the Black Power movement, it was through the 1960s through 1970s. And I want you to focus on what they wanted. They emphasized racial pride. There's a reason for that, because minority groups did not have any racial pride. They were suffering from low self-esteem. And I want to bring that up because there's a difference between saying Black power and white power. White power is used to oppress the groups that are currently oppressed. Black power is them reminding themselves that they are actually as good as everybody else. Complete difference. So they emphasize racial pride, economic empowerment, and better, and this is what real focus, better representation politically and artistically. They called for Black history courses because American history, for the most part, is white history. Embracing of African culture, because for the most part, it was presented as African have no culture, have no history, as savages, and artistic expressions reflecting the reality of the African American people. Not what you're about to see in the next couple of slides. With that being said, I'm gonna start with a very serious film and media. The D.W. Griffiths, The Birth of a Nation. This movie was in 1915. And if you haven't seen this movie, if you can stomach it, a couple of years ago, I forced myself to watch all 3 hours and something minutes of it. It was a hard watch for me. But it was acclaimed from a film perspective as a masterpiece. And I can see why on a technical note. All right, so it was inspired by the novel The Klansman by Thomas Dixon Jr. It was the most technologically advanced and longest film ever produced at that time. So I want you to think that, wow, we care so much about this message that we're going to pour all the stops into it. We're going to make sure this movie is a hit because we want this message to come across. Now, this was the first film to be shown in the White House. I want you to see how historical this piece of media is. It portrays Black men as being unintelligent creatures driven by sexual aggression towards white women. to that, I will highlight some things didn't change. All right, it portrays the Ku Klux Klan as saviors of society. It glorifies and promotes a race war where the KKK is victorious. And at the end of the movie, it did turn into a race war. And then shortly afterwards, well, I'll get to the last point later. To summarize the whole movie, it started with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Black people were free. Then it was like black people took over, and then black people start running the country to the ground and start raping women, white women and everything. And the Ku Klux Klan came out the ashes to save society from free black folk. And after a race war, they live happily ever after. I saved you 3 some hours if you really want to know what this movie is about. Now, this movie sold like crazy. It made the Ku Klux Klan, and if you listen to racists today in 2020, they're sharing the themes of this movie. They're taking our jobs. They're ruining society. We got to protect our women. You know, these things, racism is taught. This movie may have happened over 100 years ago, but those people who grew up watching it as kids, taking it in as real, normalized behaviors that they pass on to their kids and their grandkids, and now they're the racists and stuff they have today. You have militias today getting ready for the race war right now. I mean, you see it on the news, they have their guns pointing at protesters. All right. So, but Al brought up another good point. Institutional racism is about the outcomes. It's about the outcomes. And want outcomes that support a race as dominant in America, the white race, and oppress other ones, not just African Americans, but all minority groups. Shortly after this movie, like 5 years later, the Ku Klux Klan reached its peak at 4 million members. 4 million members. But when you glorify a certain group, everybody want to join it that fit those views. All right, so I'll show you these are some pictures of the birth of a nation. You see right here, the damsel in distress. And I'm bringing up these terms because they'll come up repeatedly in media. The damsel in distress being saved by the knight in white linen armor. This is a scene, they didn't show the background because even Google want to protect certain images. But if I seen the movie a couple of years ago, this woman was running away from like a horde of black men, really white actors in blackface. And this is a scene of some of the Klansmen dressed up, taking out one of the villains, which is obviously a freed black man. But it didn't end there. You know, once that hit happened, once the desired outcomes happened, which is the demonization of African Americans, and to justify behavior to make sure they don't get any more rights, make sure they're not voting, make sure they're not making money, making sure they're not prosperous, the media continued to do so, particularly during the 1930s and the 1940s. Since Birth of a Nation was highly successful, over the next 100 years, the United States continued to saturate audiences with racially disparaging images of minority groups. And in like manner, the United States continued to put images enforcing and reinforcing the concept of white supremacy and beauty. Institutional racism takes a stronghold, particularly in targeting the minds of children during their developing years via cartoon images. Now, I've written several articles. I'm not quoting them right now because, again, I'm not a professor. But they said that a child's self-esteem happens within their first 7 years. After those 7 years, whatever trauma you have, you're going to carry it in some shape or form for the rest of your life. Now, that's why you see a lot of racism in cartoons. You have to get them while their minds are still malleable, while their minds are still willing to be formed. This is a picture of a Tom and Jerry episode. Now, I don't know how young some people in the group are. I'm 36. I grew up in the 80s. Another thing I want us to appreciate is that racism isn't a long, long time ago. These are things that happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. The Tom and Jerry started in the 40s, but I grew up looking at Tom and Jerry. And for me, this scene was just somebody who didn't know how to cook. The stove blew up, smoke hit their face, and that black smoke was on their face. Now that I'm out, now I can see outside the institution, I can see that that's blackface, and they making black people look stupid. All right. So I'll show you some more pictures of this. Now that was a clip that wasn't supposed to be there, pardon that. These are other pictures of cartoons feeding an image that the African Americans or natives in general are tribal, are not as advanced, not as intelligent, or just downright ugly by giving them deformed features. And you can look at all these images right here. I'll point out some things. These crows were all for Dumbo. And the reason why I'm saying it, because Dumbo, I think, is one of maybe the first Disney movie, definitely one of the oldest movies Disney ever produced. And it's a story that most kids in the 80s and 90s read and beyond. So you reading these things and you see Dumbo and this positive view of you could be what you want to be. And then meanwhile, you have these black crows acting ignorant all the time, hooting and hollering. Right? You would never see white doves in this position in movies back then. And there's a reason why. Peter Pan, with these tropes of Native Americans. And I wish I could show you the videos, but check out the videos when you can, just to see their behavior. Mama Two Shoes, Tom and Jerry, they cut off her face, at least when I was growing up. But look at her features. They do not look human. They do not look human. And the way she talked, I mean, I could tell you how she talked. Tom, didn't I tell you? You know, and then of course, again, Tom and Jerry, again, making people of darker complexion out to be savages. And again, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old children. And since their parents grew up watching, their parents are letting their kids see it. And this is just a cartoon for them. That's what they think. So the next slide is media bias. Again, I said this at a glance, you can make a whole presentation off of each one of these slides. Now, I went down. Everybody know who this is. This is Snow White. Her name is Snow White. Nobody names a child Snow White, but they decide to title this series Snow White. So you look at her, and if she has an actual name, I don't know what we call her Snow White. White Snow. And what was the main phrase on there? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Some white chick. She's the fairest of them all. That's the whole point of the show for Asian kids and black kids and Native American kids and white kids to understand that beauty is a white woman, period. If you don't have these features, you're not fair. Straight hair, blonde, all that jazz. But even look at this cat. The white furred cat have the nice eyelashes. And if you study human body language, when a woman looks up at a man like that, that makes that. I shouldn't even tell some of y'all females this, because if y'all don't know, y'all probably start using it. Like, this is a weakness when a guy look up, when a woman look up at a guy similar to that. It's like, how may I help you? Can I help you, please? What do you need? You need a drink? You need to carry your bags, you know. But again, this stuff is structured, it's institutionalized, it's thought out. It takes into effect human psychology. Cool World. That's a film I think that came out in the late 80s, early 90s. I don't know if I can expand it right now, but you see, and then of course, what's her name, folks? This cartoon right here. Her name is Sleeping Beauty. Again, a white woman, blonde hair, blue eyes. So again, over 100 years of society telling everybody in the United States that beauty is defined by being a white woman. And I will tell you this, growing up, and a lot of people of color can attest to this, but growing up in school, when I was in elementary school, I always found light-skinned women to be more attractive than dark-skinned women. Now, I'm thinking it's just the way it is. And for a long time, there's tensions between, in the African-American community, between light-skinned men being soft and dark-skinned men being hardcore, or light-skinned women being pretty. The more white the person's features, the better looking they are. The more African the person's features, the uglier they are. And people don't even know where these views came from. It was trained by normalizing certain behaviors and policies and standards, by normalizing these standards. If society tell you that being big is beautiful, everybody's trying to be big. If society tell you being huge and muscular, everybody's going to try to be huge and muscular. They're taking advantage of these type of things. So conversely, media bias on race and beauty. Now, you saw the white cat. Look at this cat. Look at this cat. Saying that Asian people are goofy looking. So even as, again, I told them, share a lot of my personal experiences, even as in Baltimore City, you know, black people don't own the businesses in black neighborhoods, usually Asians do. And here we are feeding the Asians kids and paying for their college tuition. And we going like this. This is a Chinese person's eyes. This is a Japanese person's eyes. Where did we learn that from? Going ching ching chong gang, all this racist stuff that even black people said about the Korean stores and markets, because we grew up looking at this. This is what an Asian person looks like. This is how they act like. They always use chopsticks. He's playing a piano with chopsticks. Ridiculous. Again, Mama Two Shoes, we talk about that, this concept that there's no beauty to be found in the black woman. And then right here, look at this woman right here. She looks, and this guy too, they look more like monsters than humans. I can't even say they look at animals look better than this. All right. So you feed in this stuff, you feed in society these media biases. All right, more about racial bias and criminality. Now, what you see right here is Tom off of Tom and Jerry. Again, cartoons I watched growing up as a kid. This is Tom. This is Black Tom. His name is Black Tom. Black Tom is always a crook trying to get Tom to do crooked things. So today in 2020, we wonder why a cop is faster to shoot an unarmed black guy than he is to shoot at a armed white guy that's shooting back at them. Maybe they grew up looking at Black Tom. Maybe society trained us from kids. All right, let's look at a more modern example. So, you know, like I said, Tom and Jerry may have been made in the 40s, but they played it well into the 80s. It's playing on TV now. Look at Simba and Scar. Guess which one is the bad guy? The one with the black mane and the darker fur. Who's the good guy? Well, the lions with the lighter colored fur. The brunette hair lion is the good guy. The black hair lion with the dark fur is the bad lion. All right. And these ones you see right here, this is World War II propaganda. As you know, the Japanese, destroyed Pearl Harbor. So instead of just saying facts, this country, the Japanese nation, is at war with the American nation. Let's just make all Japanese people look like evil monsters so that we can normalize hatred, so that we can go ahead and say kill the Japanese. Unfortunately, there was a lot of Japanese citizens who had nothing to do with Japan's actions that were thrown in concentration camps. Now, how was that behavior justified? It was justified because of media. That's how it was justified. Again, the trope. See this white woman right here running for her lives. There's another trope I'm gonna throw out there too. The one of the damsel in distress. Over 100 plus years of media saying white women need to be saved from minority men. That's why in Gettysburg College orientation, they told us on orientation day, it was in the context of drinking, but I got the message. You better not have sex with them drunken white women because you will be found guilty of rape. All they gotta do is say it. Now, for those who think that was a long time ago, class of 2006, well, you heard about that Karen situation. She knew that all she had to do was call the cops on a black man in the park because she wanted him gone. And she knew that 9 times if I call the police and I play the damsel in distress role, it's hardwired into the police brain, onto a white man's brain or society's brain to save the damsel in distress from that monster over there. So again, we say, I don't understand where all this police brutality comes from. I don't understand why. This is why, because it's in our brain that the white woman is sweet and innocent and needs help. And she's harmless and she couldn't possibly do wrong. Botham John, a case where a black man was shot in his own home by a white cop. Man, even the black female judge gave her a hug. Perhaps we are trained to feel sorry for them more often than a black victim, period. All right, more glancing. The effects on self-esteem, the doll test. A lot of us heard about the doll test before. It was conducted in the 1940s, around the time where the Tom and Jerry cartoons and all these other cartoons, the racist Warner Brother cartoons were coming out, and they wanted to test its effects on self-esteem on kids. And to sum it up, because of time, they took children between the ages of 3 and 7. They were asked to identify the race of the doll. So number one, they were already able to identify race. Now, when the kid is born, they will play a white kid, Asian kid, doesn't matter how a kid look like. They're naturally full of love. But over time, they are taught, this is a black doll, this is a white doll. And then they were asked to pick which one they preferred, the various questions and situations. And they found that the majority preferred the white doll. Now, they used black children. They preferred the doll that did not look like them. And the Clarks concluded that prejudice, discrimination, and segregation created a feeling of inferiority among African-American children and damaged their self-esteem. So then some people like to say, well, what about black on black crime? How about this? A lot of African Americans and people in the African American community are also suffering from lack of self-worth and self-esteem because they were taught to prefer white people and they were taught to hate themselves and see themselves as monsters. So then, more things about the effect of self-esteem is, and I'll read this out. It says, in a particularly memorable episode while Dr. Clark was conducting experiments in rural Arkansas, he asked a black child which doll was most like him. The child responded by smiling and pointing to the brown doll. That's a nigger. I'm a nigger. Dr. Clark described this experience as disturbing or more disturbing than the children in Massachusetts who would refuse to answer the question or who would run out of the room crying. And of course, when they talk about features, they said that features that are natural to the Caucasian race are more desirable. You know, the straight hair, the nose, the blue eyes, the blonde hair, and all those other type of things. Which leads us to another period to combat against this. The Black is Beautiful movement. And they said 1960s, 1970s, nah, I'm sorry. It's still going on today. I mean, sometimes you might call it Black Girl Magic or the natural hair movement that was very prominent during the 2000s. So some people might say something ignorant like, well, Asians wear their natural hair all the time. Yeah, well, Asians were never made into monsters because of the difference in their hair. So even when it comes to Black Lives Matter, and somebody say all lives matter, I was like, well, if all lives matter, you shouldn't be offended by saying Black Lives Matter. Now, this isn't even a Black Lives Matter post, but this is what I told somebody before. Black people are saying Black Lives Matter because some of them don't believe it themselves. Over 100 years of media saying your lives don't matter, that your life is subpar, subhuman. All right, so the Black is Beautiful movement are just efforts aimed to dispel the notion that the natural features of Black people, skin tone, facial features, hair texture, etc., are not inherently ugly. So NDRE have a song called Brown Skin so that young girls could love their brown skin. They already grew up looking at Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They already looked at, Sleeping Beauty. Well, you don't see white people making a song about white skin. You don't need a song talking about white skin. Y'all have like 400 years talking about how your skin is better than everybody else's. We're just trying to say our skin is intrinsically beautiful. And guess what? So is yours. But we know that already. Y'all, it's been institutionalized that y'all have some nice features. But the reality is those same white guys have been doing stuff to Black women in multiple continents too, but they want to call them ugly in the media presence. It's done for a reason. So here's a quick question. And y'all could probably talk about it later for discussion. How is it that the doll movement test has been done in the 1940s. They already see what media is doing to the self-esteem of the African-American community. And yet all in the 80s, here I am looking at the same racist cartoons in 1980s, in the early 1990s. But let's keep moving forward. These are the Cabbage Patch dolls. I don't know if they still sell these things, but they were a very, very big deal while growing up. And I remember my mom in the background, and I'll talk a little bit more about my mom later if I have the time. But look at this diversity. You have the blonde-haired one, you have the red-haired one, you have the lighter blonde-haired one, you have the brunette one. Oh yeah, there go the token Black doll. We're not racist no more. There go the Black doll. Smaller to the side. Again, this is how people grew up in the 80s and 90s. Now, 90s babies to 2000 babies. Go Power Rangers. Guess what color the Asian Ranger is? These are the original. She's the yellow one. Guess who's the smart one in the group? The white guy. Guess who's wearing pink? The white girl. And guess who's the Black Ranger? The African American one. And if anybody noticed that he was the only one, everybody else was fighting like kung fu folks. He had to be spending most of his time dancing. He was a super duper stereotype. I could not stand him. And he was the only one whose main weapon was also a gun. All right. And then he's not on here. And I grew up looking at Power Rangers, I like Power Rangers. But I'm seeing, again, stereotypes being reinforced. That's why I went to Gettysburg and all the white people thought I could dance. And Hank and Monique will laugh at me because, no, I can't dance. I can't dance. But you Black, and they say, you Black and you don't know how to dance? Who told you that all Black people can dance? Oh, yeah, maybe Power Rangers did. Or maybe since back in slavery, they had Black slaves dancing for their entertainment. And now that's still being enforced in today's time. Now, this is, but even this, sadly enough, the Cabbage Patch dolls, the fact that there was progress. The fact that the Power Rangers even had a Black superhero, period, was progress, but not an arrival. All right. Now, this is, I think, the 40th anniversary of the first Black Barbie doll. Now, Barbie was created, I think, in 19, I don't know, a long time ago. I don't know if it's 59 or 49. I'm forgetting. But put it like this. Years later, they finally had a Black one. Now, the Barbie doll was specifically designed to boost a woman's self-esteem. You know, the Barbie Lambo is the start of the show. Pow, pow, pow wheels. I remember those commercials. You know, the Barbie Dream House. Barbie was designed to help young girls dream. But when Black girls and Asian girls and Native girls was looking at their future, they only seen a beautiful life was for white blonde women. So when a Black Barbie came out, it changed the whole entire game. And not one of her friends on the side, like this was actually a Barbie. So it's like, okay, now Black women could live their dreams and everything like that too. Again, one of the biggest, the largest effect of media, institutional racism in media is the effect it has on one's self-esteem. If you do not think you have value, you will never be able to reach levels. And they know that. So they continued it so that white children and their descendants will have the self-esteem to reach new heights. But the minority kids, man, I'm just trying to get by, see another day. And then they'll, I'll stop that later. But, people say Black people waste their clothes a lot. Well, because their name don't mean nothing, their last name don't mean anything. They don't have a heritage. They don't have a legacy. Don't have a history. They try to buy value for themselves through the names of white corporations like Louis Vuitton and Prada and Gucci. And they don't even shop from Black businesses. Where's the pride in that? They were always taught that white was superior. So I want to buy from white people so I could just get to touch that superiority. All right. Again, normalized behavior because of institutional racism. But in middle school, when I was wearing a fake Tommy Hilfiger, they want to laugh. You're not wearing real Tommy Hilfiger. See, I didn't know it's because we lack pride in ourselves. See, like the Trumps or not, the Trumps don't care about what clothes they wear. They're defined by their family's power and accomplishments, not by the accomplishments of somebody who put the clothes you paid too much money for on your back. All right, so I will say this in 2 minutes, and I'll give you a bonus, and then it's it. I have one more slot left. When I was little, I would wonder why my mom would take the peach crayon out of my hand, because color books in the 80s, everybody was pretty much white, and they looked white, and I knew they were white, so I always get the yellow crayon for their hair, and I would get like the peach crayon, because I don't know what crayon would actually look like a white person's skin. So I get like the peach crayon or a pink crayon that I try to color them. My mom used to always say I would put a brown crayon in my hand and a black crayon in my hand. She, you color that person's hair black, and you color that person's skin brown. And I'm looking at her like she crazy. I'm like, they're not Black people though. It's just you do it. I'm what my buddy doll, and I just noticed that doing this. I went to my buddy doll, and my mom was like, "You're getting the black my buddy doll," but I'm like, "But my buddy's white. You're getting the black. They have black ones too." Now you know what's funny? Now Chucky was designed off of my buddy, and they made sure Chucky's skin was brown, but the actual my buddy doll's white. Again. That criminal bias. That's why even a Black person, when you see a Black person walking down the street with a hoodie, you checking stuff, you locking your doors. But when a white person walking down the street, you don't. Even a Black person in the hood don't think that white person is a threat, which is hilarious. And then furthermore, in Gettysburg College, for years, I'll walk down the street minding my business. Whenever a white couple come up the street, she's either grab her girlfriend's, her boyfriend's hand, or clutching her purse, or doing that smile like, "I come in peace, smile like, hey." And I can't even tell you how many times I was asked to see somebody that they get shot, or how many times I was told in the work world, "Well, you speak well. Why are you surprised I speak well?" All right, so here's a bonus. The white male supremacy trope. Okay, so there's always a theme. So again, there's a consistent theme in media that darker people are villains. There's a consistent theme in media that the white woman needs to be saved. And there's people want her so bad. Like even King Kong, for example, big black gorilla kidnaps a white girl, surprise, and kill the big black gorilla and save the white. All right, but also there's this theme of white male, specifically supremacy. I am a Christian, so don't get offended. But 9 times out of 10, Jesus did not look like he was Italian. Not if you were a Jew during ancient times living in the Middle East with Egyptian genetics. But this has been used as a sign of supremacy. Look, your savior even looks like a white person. Look at this. Speaking of savior tropes, The Last Samurai, played by Tom Cruise. Now, some people say, well, this was based off a true story. Absolutely. So where are all the Japanese people that were main characters on the show? Where's the emperor that hired him? Where's the Asian, So, white man goes to Japan, he dominates. White man goes, this is Tarzan, by the way, a recent Tarzan. A white man goes to Africa, you throw him out to the wolves, he come back, the head of the pack, and he's even showing natives of Africa how to run their jungles. And we looking at that. And my goodness, the gods of Egypt are even white. This movie came out in 2016. So again, institutional racism, whether we see it or not, is not something that happened a million years ago. And again, I would like to have some discussion. So just be aware. Be aware of what you're seeing. Nobody's tripping when we say white God. This is 2016, but it's coming off of 101 years of messages of white male superiority, white women being the most precious thing in the United States, and black women, men and women being monsters, villains, or idiots. And that's not the case. So we got to continue to fight for positive, more historically accurate images of everybody, and not be so offended when oppressed groups take the extra step to try to undo some of the damage. Thank you for your attention to this. I guess I'll turn over to the questions and discussion portion.
Sam, I just want to hit on a few things that you brought up. I mean, Sam, you just did an incredible job with just kind of walking us through and showing the power of and as we went through the definition that we have for structural or institutional racism. I mean, you really hit on the cultural representations and the power of that, and how it spills over. And I mean, especially there's several points. One of the things that I really liked is talking about the impact and the indoctrination through a lot of these images from young children, how there was a lasting impact either on the children that like in this case Black children, how it will impact them moving forward, or for other children that will just grow up assuming, that are in the majority, that assuming that they are superior for a bunch of different things. I mean, you just did a really excellent job of laying those things out. I just want to touch on two things. One, to the point about the indoctrination and attacking or addressing youth. The one of the things that we talked about was like the daughters of the Confederacy at the turn of the century, and how they went through and they came up with a comprehensive way. At that time, a lot of the Confederate soldiers were dying out, and so they wanted to hold on to the legacy, and so they were perpetuating. It was the lost cause, and there was about 5 tenets at that time, and that was first that the Confederate War, that the Confederacy did not start the war, that slavery really was not the main, or I would say the predominant factor of the Civil War, that enslaved people were generally well treated and that they enjoyed their time being enslaved, that the United States only won because industry of manpower and a willingness to sacrifice their lives of the soldiers. And then another thing was that they said that the Confederate soldiers were uniquely heroic, and Confederate women were also uniquely honorable. And the reason I bring that up, they went through doing kind of like what you were saying. They were the ones that they were behind a lot of the Confederate statues that you see all over throughout the South, including one of the statues that was revealed by or unveiled with Woodrow Wilson in Arlington Cemetery. I mean, they were donating these things. And because they knew the power of this kind of like cultural representation. But then this is where you see a nexus between that cultural representation and education and institutions, is they will create these pamphlets. And in these pamphlets, they were giving instructions to local school boards throughout the South saying what should qualify for appropriate history textbooks. And they will say that they have to make sure that those textbooks included the tenets that I just mentioned. And so in addition to that, they created after school programs for children in the South. And they were doing the exact same thing like what you were talking about, reinforcing these ideas that slavery was not the main focus of the Civil War, and that the Confederate soldiers that lost the Civil War, that they were honorable and that their cause was honorable. And so we go back to this indoctrination, especially at a young age. And so that's why you fast forward to today, so people saying that if you're taking down these statutes, like you're erasing my history, and this is a history that we have that is honorable. They also would suppress the actual events, like a lot of people, what's been in the news a lot lately, as you talk about the Black Wall Street and the race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as well as in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Where just people are erasing it from the books. And that is a powerful thing. And they realize that if they were the ones to write history, they control the narrative, and they control the legacy moving forward. The other thing is, I love the fact he brought up the Clark's doll test. And what's interesting about that was, again, intersection between the cultural representation and institutions. When Thurgood Marshall, when the NAACP were trying Brown v. Board of Education in '54, they used the Clark's doll test to say, look, separate but equal is not equal. And just a clip, what they said here is they were saying that they show that that the life of these students being brought up in these schools that they're separate and they were not equal, that it would lead to a lifelong, a life of believing that they were inferior. And that's what they got from the doll test. Now, last thing I did want to mention, since I brought up the housing, the Federal Housing Authority before, and I forgot and neglected to mention, was this, as we talk about structural, the other part of it was, besides the cultural representation, is the policies that they had and the institutional practices. So imagine the Federal Housing Authority at the beginning of the 19th century, or right after the turn of the century. They were creating, they pushed, and you see this in the New Deal, where it was not applied to Black Americans the same way. In the case of the Federal Housing Administration, they were saying that to fund many of these housing projects that were sprawling across the country, and in New York, you had one where it was like 72,000 units. They said that they had to put in the covenants. I'm not going to get into like a legal class here, but you have covenants that are tied to land. And what you do in those covenants, just like if you've ever, if you have a home, you might have there might be like a walkway that's associated. You'll see that there's an easement. And they had covenants that were tied to land, which regardless of the owners, at that time, you were not allowed to sell to Blacks. And so Blacks, they couldn't own the homes, but when the Federal Housing Administration enforced that was the case, even if you want to sell your home, you couldn't sell it to a Black person in the neighborhood. And that's an example of these policies. Many of those covenants are still tied to the land, but now you can't enforce them because there's been change. But those are some examples. Okay, I'm looking at the time here. I think we covered, there's so much, as Sam said before, there's so much. He just touched on, and he did a great job on touching a few things. But I'll just come back to a question I asked everybody before, like, well, why are we here today? And I'm curious, if maybe we can put some answers in the comment section. Why are you here today? What did you hope to either get from it, or what did you hope to achieve? I'm sorry, I didn't even ask Monique if I could do that. Can I do that?
You can do whatever you like. This is your show.
Okay. So I hope, let's see if we have anything here. Why are you here? Well, as people are thinking about that, I'll also ask the question, if you all can tell me considering what Sam went over and what I went over in terms of structural racism or systemic racism, like cultural representation, what would be something that you will see that will be an indicator of progress? Let's say after 2020, we're saying if we see something, what is an indicator of progress? I know everybody's getting ready to type. I see the fingers moving.
Hi, Cheryl Walker Davis.
How are you doing?
How are you? I'm from the class of '75 at Gettysburg College. I think that the very fact that we're having this conversation with such an amazing, diverse representation is an indication of progress. Over the past few weeks, ever since the George Floyd, the brutal killing of George Floyd, I've been contacted by a number of my professional colleagues, white colleagues, who realize that although they view themselves as being open-minded, accepting, somewhat liberal, that perhaps they've got it wrong. They want to engage in a dialogue about how they can do better, understanding the issues that have been so dominant in the news now, and perhaps what they've missed. Because I think that the international outcry has set the stage for the important dialogue that both of you, you and Sam, I was proud of you. I was so proud of you today because you represented all of us so well. So thank you for that. But surely the fact that we've been having these meetings, these discussions, and many, many others that I'm sure we've all been involved in is a sign of progress. I think the challenge is how to change that progress or convert the progress into enduring systemic and institutional change so that 30 years from now, we're not at the same point having the same conversation, because as you've indicated, there have been cycles. We've been through this before. There have been cycles, and for every gain that's made, particularly systemically, there is a very deliberate setback to try to moderate that change. So the question is, where do we go from here?
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that response. It was very thoughtful. And you are right. The fact that we are here today having a discussion with the group that we have here, it's in itself an indicator of progress. And I really do like kind of the question that you posed back, like, well, what is something that we can put in place that would be that's sustainable, and so we're not coming back in how many years and addressing and having the same conversation. That made me think of something in Greta B. Bollinger. This was the case in, I believe, in 2003. It was a law school case about race up at the University of Michigan, and there was the Supreme Court justices were having a conversation, and one of the things they made an indicator, and I think it was Clarence Thomas that said this, they're saying that they acknowledged the inequity and poor representation in the law by people of color, but they said that, yeah, we'll allow for race to be a factor in terms of admissions right now. It'll be a factor. You can't do quotas, but you can be a factor. But they said that this should be resolved in about 25 years. And so they put a time and say that 25 years. So I would ask you all, kind of just piggyback on your question and saying, like, so we can avoid coming back. What is that we could do? Can we put a time on it? Or is it something that progressively things are getting better? Does it morph? Does it change? I also wanted to read some of the things here.
I want to say some of the responses they had to the first question. We had Brittany. Please, I'm gonna just call you Brittany. She said an indicator of progress that I think could happen is, based on Mr. Knight's slide on race and beauty, would be having Black men and women becoming more and more seen as beautiful without being sexualized. And I have to say, I absolutely agree. One of the tests that I seen in my life to prove your point is that even when they attempt to say, hey, look, black women are beautiful, black men are handsome, but it's always done in a sexualized manner. Again, I'll use an example. When a white woman wears short shorts, that's seen as innocent. But the minute a black woman wears short shorts, she's called all types of negative names because of but both of them wearing short shorts. So it's the sexualization of the African-American male and female that has to stop, in addition to knowing that we're beautiful. And Amy said, why I'm here? She said, I want to learn so I can look at and confront my own bias so that I can be better and be more prepared to confront other bias. And I even mentioned in my own presentation, I had a bias towards Asians and Native Americans. One of the biggest discussion now with the NFL is, do we keep the Redskins logo? Do we continue to normalize the stereotypes of behaviors we have towards the natives here in our own personal bias? So I appreciate your comment, and I'll pass it over to Mr. L. Vincent to the other comments.
Yeah, I see over here. Thanks, Sam. I'm looking at, I think Logan said, I want to continue to become a better ally and feel that one of the best ways to do this is to seek out opportunities to further education myself so that I can do better, especially during the time of quarantine. We are in a unique situation where we have greater access to time and time to learn. I agree. And there is a book that I just came up recently as I was reading more about redlining. Oh, where is it? And that's going to be the next one. I started to look at it quickly, but feel free to throw up books here. I mean, one that people generally talk about is like The New Jim Crow. That is a good book. There's several. I'm going to see if I can grab the other one that I mentioned, or somebody mentioned is here. Let's see. There's another comment here. I am here to listen and to contribute to the discussion on race. Race is not a common topic in a profession, higher education setting, and it's nice to listen to different perspectives. No, I agree with you. That's great. Well, you all were just responding to our questions. Do you have any questions that you might want to ask now?
Well, while they come up with their questions, I'd like to answer the last question that you said. You said about how progress work, how it function. That's why I showed, the Black Power pictures, that this isn't, right now, this isn't the first time we've had allies, and we can't get stuck on thinking we're by ourselves. People want what's right, with different levels of perspectives. And I believe it's just a small yet influential minority of people who want to spread hate and division. So with that being said, again, when you go forward, it's like a law of physics. Whenever you have resistance one way, you'll get resistance back. So progress is progress. Let's celebrate the progress. For example, Power Rangers with the stereotypical black guy was better than the days when the black guy was just trying to rape everybody, But at the same time, I think what happened after the civil rights movement, I believe that that we acted like because segregation was over, we're living happily ever after. That's fairy tales. In real life, you have to understand it. Just because you make progress doesn't mean you have arrived at perfection. And I believe we lost a lot of time between what happened with George Floyd in 1968. In a lot of ways, we're a little bit further than we were back where there was a Black Wall Street, back where there were better school systems for minorities, because we celebrated too soon.
No, you're right. You're right.
I think one of the important pieces here when we talk about institutional or systemic racism is that a lot of people don't want to keep the main thing. So, for example, you look at, we're taking Aunt Jemima off of the bottle because it's kind of racist, or we're going to rename the main bedroom from master bedroom because of the connotations of, plantation life, or Lady Antebellum is changing their name from Lady Antebellum to Lady A because of the historical context of saying antebellum. And those are fine. You should have bended those. The issues are systemic. So if someone is asking you to stop killing Black and brown people. Let's work on how we do that. If people are saying police brutality is an issue, how do we address that? Or how do we get more Black and brown faces in Hollywood and at the table and paid equally? Let's get to how we address those issues, as opposed to saying, oh, we're changing the name of, and we're going to hire a chief diversity officer of, and let's make sure that we have more Black and brown faces in the picture of our corporate, image now. And it's like, that's not how you fix systemic issues. I remember working with Victor Arcelis in housing when I was an RA, and he says you have to go to where the magic happens. And where the magic happens is often uncomfortable, it's challenging, but when you get to that place, you've achieved your goal. And I think we as a country and as a society and as human beings don't like being uncomfortable. And for that reason, we have systemic racism being this kind of comfort zone that we've settled in. And we have made some strides, please don't get me wrong, but when we allow for things like imagery to be the needle that moves and not whole policies being implemented and created, we're just saying that the imagery is okay. In order to address issues of systemic and institutionalized racism, we have to get to where the magic happens. We have to get to the uncomfortable part in order to make sure that we're moving the needle.
Monique, I really appreciate that point. You brought up a lot. Well, you said a mouthful, and it made me think. I'm in the field of education, and I come from a family of educators. My mother taught between Detroit and New Brunswick, New Jersey, for over 40 years. My sister teaches here in DC, and I used to teach as well. But you can look at schools and look at education as one of those places where you can really unpack a lot of the structural racism. And the way you do it, this was interesting, under Obama administration, the Department of Justice started to look at disparate impact, not just disproportional treatment of, especially in disciplinary actions, and say like, let's start looking at how some of the policies we have, like we said in the definition, whether it's intentional or not intentional, like if it is disproportionately or there's creating a disparate impact on some students, especially students of color, then we need to address it. And you see it. We know that when in our schools that are in more urban areas, they're over policed. Instead of just having the appropriate amount of administrators to handle disciplinary issues in-house, we invite student resource officers or the police to come in. If there is you've seen it on camera, where the student is fighting, instead of just addressing it as one of those school issues, the officers are carting the kids away. And then that's their first contact with the juvenile justice system. And you know that there are collateral consequences for when that happens. Then that starts, and we can just go down a list of the things. Our Black and brown boys are disproportionately stopped. They're disproportionately charged for offenses. Then they're disproportionately tried as adults as opposed to being tried as children for anything. And these things just continue to lead. And it's those things. So it's what we see as something really small, it starts a chain of events. And the last thing I did want to mention was this: all these things, they start at our local municipalities. And I think that we have a duty to make sure that we are getting involved, whether it is your school board or your board of elections. That's one that people don't talk about often. Your city council, because that's where they are creating these laws, and that's what has happened. That's how people have been, where they gerrymander. That's how people have been moved out of different areas, how they've been impacted. So that's where we have to get involved. And sometimes you're not comfortable. And I'll say this: I've been practicing law in the U.S. Virgin Islands for the last several years, and I felt quite comfortable because when I walk into the door, people calling me. They're like, "Attorney, how you doing?" Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, like automatically there's a amount of deference that's happening, even though I'm like the youngest person in the room. While that has not been my experience in the States. And so, but the thing is, as much as I've enjoyed that, it has done a lot to boost my confidence in terms of practice. I know that I can't stay there because, as Monique was talking about, I have to be in those other places where I will feel uncomfortable because I have to be at the table to bring up issues when nobody else around the table looks like me.
I want to bring up a question that Brittany sent. It says, so when Mr. Knight was talking about how Black people were seen, especially in media, as ugly or aggressive, and white women were seen as the concept of beauty and needed to be saved, I want to hear your opinion about how some Black men will prefer white women over Black women, and how childhood lessons on race and beauty could contribute to this. I was also going to ask about the over-sexualization of Black women, especially at a young age, but you've already touched on it. So I will try to answer this question within the context of institutional racism. As you see, it's not just, Black men, but also Black women have been trained to prefer white women. And I'm not even talking about sexually. Again, the Botham Jean case. How many times do you see a judge hug somebody who murders an innocent person in cold blood? But this was a Black woman hugging a white woman who killed a Black man in cold blood. Now, people could argue that, well, his brother did the same thing, but if you're a judge, you're supposed to be a professional. And I've never seen judges hugging murderers, So with that being said, it's because the Dahl test already proved it in the 1940s. It's because we have been trained, but it's not just looks. Black women are also presented as aggressive and angry and stubborn, and white women are often presented as being docile, sweet and supportive. And you believe, that's the scripture in the Bible says faith come by hearing, okay? You believe what you hear at a young age. You believe what you see. So if you spent 0 to 7 years being told this, and that's all, and that's why segregation added to it. The Dahl test is about segregation, but here's the thing: segregation sealed the deal. Because if every time I see a Black person, it looks this way, and I never get a chance to meet a Black person in real life, when I meet a Black person in real life, I'm believing what I've seen on TV. And don't get me started on the hip hop industry and all those songs that we all like to listen to that's reinforcing said stereotypes. So when it comes to men preferring women, I say start with the kids. The enemy that likes to cause us to be divided starting at the age of kids. Why we think we're going to outdo them by starting with people who are already damaged? I'm not saying ignore them. I'm trying to answer your question the best I can. African Americans need to have their own media platforms. We need to start writing more books, especially for kids. When Tookie Williams did it, we still say he should burn for being a Crip. So what? All right, let him be executed, but use his books. If it stopped your kids, to be the next gang member. Right. We have to start writing. I know Melissa Montero, I believe she's writing children's books. She's an alumni class of 2006 from Gettysburg. We need to support people who make it in the upper echelon of like your Tyler Perry's and your folks that say, hey, let's start making movies. Go to your local religious organizations, say, hey, put all that mega church money together and put up some nice billboards of happily married Black couples. The more young men and women see positive images, put some, these are suggestions, these are not prescriptions. Put some of that trash music up, or at least don't have your kids looking at women shaking their booty all the time. And start playing positive hip hop, positive rap music. I listen to country too. I never heard country singers make themselves and their children look like hoodlums day in and day out, and make the women look like sex objects day in and day out. Now there's some that's raunchy, but they're very few and far in between. But we accept these negative stereotypes because in part we still believe it. So to answer your question, we gotta on a large scale be in charge of our media, but even on your level, if you have a kid, you be in control of the media that goes in your house and what they're looking at on YouTube and social media and everything else.
Yeah,
So
no.
I want to be very mindful of everyone's time because, of course, we know that this conversation could go on forever. But like I said, when we usually wrap up these conversations, we send out a follow up with the recording and resources and contact information. So I want to thank Sam and Al Vincent again for just engaging in the conversation around institutional and structural racism and getting the ball rolling because I know that after classes start, we'll still have this content to be able to share with students, faculty, and staff.